questions. All
Good
right,
luck.
so I'm here with Ryan Norbauer. Thank you for joining me, Ryan.
My pleasure.
You had me on your podcast a couple weeks ago when I was in LA. Is that posted yet, or is that still in post production somewhere?
Not yet, actually. We're holding the first few episodes to sort of release as a batch together, and you were the first one. So
Oh, I
it's still
was your
pending
first
others.
guest? No kidding. Wow.
Correct.
What an honor. Thank you.
Well,
Well, when that comes out, I'll be sure to let everyone here know about it so they can go and check that out. Your podcast is sort of on the other end of a certain spectrum than mine. Mine is as low budget, kind of you bare bones as possible, and you rent a studio and three cameras and assistants. It's like being on a TV show.
although maybe in both cases motivated by the same sort of laziness, I used to do all the podcast setting up myself, and I have, I'm a designer and I care about aesthetics a lot and really into photography, and so I want it to look nice, and so if I do it myself, that means like setting up for 6 hours and all this equipment and shit,
Yeah.
and it's just a huge pain, and so. I discovered, the beauty of living in LA is there's all this entertainment industry stuff and studios everywhere you can rent, and there's just a place you can pay money, and they do all that for you, and you just walk in and sit down. So I think it comes from the same place as yours, actually, which is just I don't want to deal with it.
That's an interesting point you make, and it was something I was going to talk about later, but maybe I'll go to it right away. I really enjoy your website. You're a very good writer, and
Thank you.
every time I was just as getting ready for this conversation, I went back and reread the about Ryan page, which is very amusing, and there's a lot to unpack there. But the last paragraph is related to what you were just saying about laziness motivating both of us in different directions. You write, I'm pretty sure that everything is fairly easy. Most of what passes for intelligence is just persistence and a high tolerance for boredom, both of which may technically be the same thing. So you're saying persistence and high tolerance for boredom, that may just be two ways of describing the same characteristic?
I mean, I think at a fundamental level, that remark is about this idea of what people think of as intelligence culturally, right?
Yeah.
And there are things that people associate with intelligence that oftentimes aren't anything like particularly innate, but just a willingness to slog through a lot of things that other people view as obscure or tedious or whatever, right? And so it's just, I'm not saying that there's not merit in the ability to do those things, but it's different than what most people mean conventionally by intelligence. And I think when I was, to whatever extent I've been able to sort of succeed in various little domains that I've dabbled in life, it has only been by being willing to just like sit through a fair amount of boredom, study things in great detail and sort of learn them on my own in a persistent way, and then you come out of the end of that looking really smart, but it's not because of smarts per se as most people think of it. It's just because you're willing to like do the stuff that most people don't find exciting. That was certainly true in academia for me.
Yeah, no, see, that paragraph really struck me because it runs directly counter to my own definitions of intelligence.
Well, please expand on your definition then.
My definition of and again, it's not a static definition. It's just sort of an innate, and I think it's a very self-serving definition, by the way. It is the unwillingness to be bored. In other words, I don't play any musical instruments. I haven't, founded companies or, I don't hold patents or anything like that. My best buddy growing up played half a dozen instruments, spoke 5 languages, was an extremely disciplined thinker, and also a Star Trek fan, by the way.
Those things often go together. Those of us who admire the character of Spock, I think, are drawn to that.
That's it. He was Spock and I was Kirk, right?
Sure.
So I was the impulsive, go with your gut, ask the girl out, and he was the guy standing in the corner, like too afraid to ask her out and, getting kind of neurotic about it. But if she'd ever spoken to him, she would have been incredibly impressed because, he's a fucking genius, right? But there I am hogging up the spotlight with, my sort of spontaneity or whatever. But
I'm definitely the other guy, for sure.
What's that?
In life. I'm definitely the other guy.
Yeah, exactly. We're again two ends of a spectrum, but when I look at my life, the best things that happened are, at least in the narrative I tell myself, they're a result of my unwillingness to be bored. So I had a really high-paying job in Manhattan right out of college. And I did that for a couple of years when it was novel and crazy and totally unlike anything I'd ever done before. And if I weren't so intolerant of boredom, I'd still be there. I'd be a guy wearing a three-piece suit managing real estate in Midtown Manhattan. Instead, I quit the job
totally
and went to
resonates
India.
with me too. Like I share that for whatever it's worth. I'm sorry for talking over you, but
No, please. If you don't talk over me, we'll never hear from you.
that might be true. But because both of us are sort of, calibrated in both directions in that other way as well. I'm normally a very quiet person, but maybe the best word to use there, I chose the wrong word, I think, when I wrote that. I think I should have said tedium rather than boredom. Because I myself am also extremely allergic to boredom, in the traditional sense of I don't persist through something that I don't find interesting.
Right.
I never have, right?
That's what I was getting at.
That's why I've done so many different things, right?
Right. Yeah, because the first paragraph of your little bio here shows you to be someone who's been all over the place. Right? You were in academia, you've worked for British Parliament, you were doing something at NASA. You started 4 different companies, including a dating site or dating app or something. I mean, and now you're doing this high-end retro nostalgia keyboard thing. It's like you're all over the place. You're clearly not someone who's comfortable pushing through boredom.
Yeah, I think tedium is probably the better word, because that's really the distinction here, is that for me, when I find something that is interesting to me, I am very happy to slog almost infinitely through something that to other people would look like tedium. But it's not actually out of boredom. What I'm saying, using the word boredom in that sense, I recognize that most other people would view it as boring activity, right? So sitting and endlessly making vocabulary flashcards and things about the structure of the French language or whatever that I did when I was in college, like that, for me, it was incredibly satisfying activity, but most people would think I was insane and that was the most boring thing a human being could do. But it was not boring for me subjectively. It was merely what I think we could objectively describe as tedious. Right? So
Okay,
making me
right.
realize I just chose the wrong word there, actually.
You're willing to put in the time and work to get somewhere you want to be.
Willingness is not even the question. I think, like you, I'm drawn by my inherent interest. I just have this sort of classic ADHD personality profile where I don't really get to choose what I'm interested in. I follow along after my interest, and that can oftentimes look like an ability to extremely hyper-focus on things. But I can't really direct it very much at will. It's just whatever I'm excited about right now. And one of the reasons why I've ended up shifting around a lot from different careers is once I have reached a point where I feel like I've learned everything there is to know or that's exciting or interesting to me in that domain, I just don't want to do it anymore. And that oftentimes entails completely self-sabotagingly abandoning a bunch of career points or whatever that I've accumulated that other people wish that they could have, and then just throwing it all away and starting from scratch. slightly to the annoyance of friends and family members around me. But I just can't help myself. When I'm bored, truly bored, I can't do the thing.
Right, right. Yeah. Reading through your website again, one theme that comes out a lot to me, and again, this could be, my own perspective, noting certain things. I feel like I sense a discomfort with your own success.
It's. I mean, I don't even know if I would describe myself as particularly successful. I think
there
other
it
people. Yeah,
That's
I know
my
there are things
point.
that on paper people would be like, "Oh, yes, that
Yeah.
seems like that thing," but I just don't share that definition because, if I'm just selfishly pursuing my interest and dropping something the moment it's not satisfying or interesting to me, where's the virtue in that? Like, what? There's no. How is that successful?
Well, but is
I'm
success virtuous? Aren't those two totally different concepts?
Well, unfortunately, a lot of people conflate those two concepts, right? Of like, because I think a lot of times people do things. That's kind of why I have that first section in my self-description is like, here's a bunch of things that on paper people will be like, oh, that sounds fancy, right? And then to establish why I think that's kind of dumb and why I'm doing this other like really silly stuff nowadays, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the most important things that I've learned in my life is things that confer social status just aren't very rewarding, right? And I wasn't pursuing them because they conferred social status. I just thought they would be interesting, and they happened to coincide with things that people attached social status to, right? Like I didn't want to be involved in politics. I didn't like the I wasn't going to go like work for a lobbying firm or anything like that, though I definitely could have when I got out of my job in London. I just always been interested for some strange reason in British politics, right? And British culture and all of that. And I had this very unusual opportunity to go work in this completely foreign environment and a totally different culture at the highest levels of the British government, and that just sounded really cool and interesting to me, right?
Can
And
you
that's why I
talk
did it.
about that? Like, how did that opportunity come about?
Yeah, so
Because you're American, right?
I am an American. Yeah, a professor friend of mine. I approached him about helping me design a sort of like custom PhD program that was going to be like a hybrid between psychology and political science, because there were some things at the intersection of those two things I was interested in. And he was like, yeah, I would be happy to advise you in doing that. But as an aside, I run this program that's like a kind of exchange program for American university. We select one American university student to go work in the office of a member of the British Parliament every year for 1 year. And it's like it's subsidized by the university, but it was based on a friendship between that professor and that member of the British Parliament, right? And they just came up with the idea that this would be a cool thing to do. I honestly don't really know why. The sort of nominal role was I was handling foreign affairs policy for that member of parliament. And therefore, it made sense to have a foreigner do it, or it made more sense compared to like domestic policy stuff. And so if she had like a speech to give, or if she had correspondence with constituents related to foreign policy matters, then I would basically research and write her stuff on her behalf, right? And so anyway, my professor friend, you should do this instead. It would be better for your career to just go do this instead of, you can always go back to your PhD program later. So I applied and got it, and then I just went and did it. That's all.
Where were you studying in the U.S. when this came up?
So I went to my state university, West Virginia University, because it was heavily subsidized. They paid me to go there. West Virginia has this like brain drain problem that they're always talking about, and so they kind of seek to incentivize students to stay. I kind of wanted to go to a couple of fancy Ivy League schools, and I'm pretty sure I could have gotten into them. But my parents told me that they didn't want me to do so because they were afraid it would cost them money. I saw I had this offer for heavily subsidized education at West Virginia University, and so I went. I actually don't regret that in any way, because I was like, when you're at this school where nobody gives a shit, you get treated extremely well if you are someone who does. And so I had access to all kinds of resources to do all sorts of research, and I got these really interesting research positions and stuff, just because I was like the one person who seemed to really be into it. So it was very easy. I think maybe if I had gone to Yale or something, I would have been surrounded by a bunch of gunners who were all like super extroverted, and I would have just probably faded into the background and not had many opportunities. So I'm actually grateful for that. Yeah.
I had the same experience as an undergrad, and in graduate school. In both cases, I went to not prestigious places and got a lot of attention because I gave a shit and was passionate and interested. And yeah, it was like getting a private education. It was fantastic.
Yeah, there's much to be said for that. And honestly, most of my professors that I became very good friends with, they all went to Ivy League schools. So like it was like 1 degree of separation.
Yeah, yeah. So we were texting yesterday or at some point in the last few days about different things we might talk about. And I sense, even in the things that you sort of mentioned, this idea that work is a natural state for humans and necessary for human dignity. And I'm quoting you here. You write, "It's something that causes a lot of confusion, and it's a narrative I myself have had to work hard to shake off." So you're working hard to shake off the idea that hard work is necessary to human dignity. There's this kind of I don't know, it's yin yang quality to a lot of what you write about. On your webpage, you say, "I'm an aspiring underachiever." That's the first sentence. Aspiring underachiever. And then as you say, you list these accomplishments that on paper are very impressive. And then the last sentence is, "All this misguided, insecure early life ambition mostly just taught me how disappointing and anticlimactic status-driven accomplishments can be." So it's like one hand offers and the other hand takes away. There's like a, it's very
I'm really good at making myself miserable, I think is one way of what you're describing here. That's correct.
Or maybe therein lies some kind of wisdom or balance. I'm not sure.
I just, I had never even encountered this idea, I think, honestly, until thinking a little bit more deeply about your writing, that just like work is not really, work as we think of it in the civilized world is really not part of the human framework, a set of human needs, right, that we come into the world with. I sort of grew up in this kind of like, Margaret Thatcher, Jack Donaghy view of the world, that for all human beings to, earn their place in the world and to have a kind of inherent dignity, we all need to, at the very least, wake up and sweep the shop floor for 8 hours a day. And I internalized that totally, because you just don't ever really encounter other examples of cultural models for a way to be in the world other than that.
Not even in West Virginia?
Not even in West Virginia, no. I mean, it's still like a lot of people in West Virginia have, a role in the world that many people outside of West Virginia would view as very low status, right? But within the culture, it's still like a very kind of like Protestant Christian idea about what you're supposed to be doing. And all the people who don't do that feel guilty about it, right?
And I guess
or at least pay lip service to the idea.
Yeah, and the culture of coal mining, which used to be the biggest thing happening in West Virginia, to my understanding, is very much about the dignity of work, because it's a horrible activity. It's terrifying and unhealthy and not very well paid, and so I guess the dignity of work is pretty much the only way you can keep trudging off to the mine every morning.
For sure, for sure. And I think a lot of my early life ambition actually was trying to make sure that I didn't end up in that place. Like wanted to find ways of connecting with and being a part of the outside world, and that's why sort of the world of, like, broadly speaking, intellectualism and, like, you know, sitting around and listening to NPR and stuff, like, appealed to me when I was a kid, because it was like, this is how you get out of this dismal place and how you don't end up being a coal miner, right?
What were your parents like? What kind of life were they living?
My father worked for the coal company. He wasn't a coal miner. He did, like, labor relations for the coal company. So he was basically, like, fighting the unions on behalf of the coal company, which is, I'm sure, part of where my work ethic idea comes from. Was like, I was very much instilled with this idea that, like, workers are all lazy and don't want to do anything, and, like, it's that's really shameful, and you should, you know, you need to prove your virtue and worth in the world of capitalism.
Right.
That was sort of his framework. There are many good things about my father, but and I think I got some libertarian sensibilities from him that I still am happy to have. But he definitely had a very specific idea about the virtue of work. And my mother was a teacher, like a middle school teacher.
And you have lots of brothers and sisters?
I have one 4 years younger brother.
Yeah. So you're the role model.
No, I don't know. My brother and I are outlandishly introverted, and we actually didn't really have much to do with each other, partly because of the 4 years between us. But yeah.
Outlandishly introverted. There it is again. I'm starting to see this is a cognitive quirk of yours. Yeah, outlandishly introverted, aspiring underachiever, hardworking, lazy guy.
I like funny ways of putting things. That's great.
Yeah. Well, and the internal contradictions of things, you know, which, as I said, I think there's a lot of wisdom in noting that, because almost everything is what it is and contains its opposite at the same time, you know. So can you talk a little bit about the different companies you founded? I know one of them was a gay dating app, is that right?
Correct.
But not Grindr, right?
It was not Grindr. No, in some ways I wish I had founded Grindr, because I'd probably be very wealthy right now. But in every other way, I don't wish that I had founded Grindr. So I was in London and I was coming back, and I was supposed to carry on with my academic career. But I had this idea for a dating startup that I wanted to do. This was kind of at a time when there was this was like the beginning of Web 2.0, where the idea of web applications was starting to become a thing rather than static web pages. And there was a kind of rebirth. This was around, I guess, 2004, something like that. There was a rebirth of what sort of fizzled out with the dot-com boom and bust. And there was actually a lot of obviously the internet and held a lot of promise to solve interesting problems and do interesting things that just got stifled by the dot-com bust. And with the advent of new technologies like JavaScript and using JavaScript to communicate with server backends, people started to see all sorts of new interesting possibilities, and there was a kind of second dot-com boom, which we called Web 2.0. Google Maps was the first thing to really demonstrate this technology. And I'd always been very interested in and excited about computing and technology for my whole life. And I kind of wanted to be a part of that in some way. And the idea of entrepreneurship appealed to me very much. And there are a lot of people that I knew in academia who were really unhappy. And this all kind of came together at the time with my having experienced in the UK something that we didn't have in the US. There was a kind of social network that someone had started for gay men that wasn't around dating at all. It was just based on allowing people to meet each other, and like they would have like a gay chess club or whatever, and all these different sort of nerdy things. And I think people did use it for dating around the side, but that wasn't the point of it. And there was nothing like that in the US at the time. In fact, the predominant site for gay men to meet each other was this horrible thing called Manhunt, which you could post 100 pictures of your penis, but you can only describe. You had like a tiny little text box where you could 2 sentences to say who you were as a human being. And I mean, just the name of it really kind of also suggests what it was about.
Yeah.
And of course, I'm not sexually prudish in any way. To the contrary, quite to the contrary. But it just seemed tragic to me that people couldn't. There was no place for gay men who wanted to meet each other on the basis of anything other than purely, treating each other like pieces of meat. And so I wanted to create something like what that site in the UK did in the US. Just was an idea, and it met all of these other things. It was like, okay, I could get out of academia, I could do see what it's like to be an entrepreneur. I could play in this new technology that was exciting for me, and I could feel like I was part of that. The promise of the internet that had always appealed to me so much when I was very excited about it in its early days when I was a kid. And so I just quit. I threw away all of the years I had spent in academia. I had a number of peer-reviewed publications. I was on a really good track, and I just said, "Fuck it, I want to do this instead," because again, that was just the thing that was not boring to me in the moment. And
interestingly, one of the things you were studying in academia was impulsive decision making.
Correct. Yeah, that was my main focus in psychology, experimental psychology, precisely because I think I have this tendency in myself. Right? Again, I think I have a classically ADHD sort of personality, which includes what to many people can sometimes look like choosing or favoring smaller term rewards over larger long-term ones, right? And that has always been interesting to me. And a lot of the research in that literature at the time was focused on this quantitative model from behavioral economics. If you could give people choices between shorter, smaller rewards and larger rewards, and see. You then had something you could quantify, and so you could then do experimental manipulations to see how you might alter someone's tendency to make impulsive choices, right? And so that was kind of interesting and cool to me. So that was the research that I did.
Did you find that the sort of bias towards short-term gain, I'm not sure if that's the same as impulsive choices, but when I think about that, I feel like there's an underlying sense that life is fleeting and short, whereas the people who make longer-term investments, they have a bias in the other direction, that life is more kind of predictable and long, or unending, perhaps, if they're of a religious bent. But when I've faced those sorts of decisions in my own life, I think I've chosen the short-term payoff because I don't know if there is a long-term.
Yeah. Well, I mean, from an evolutionary perspective, that's actually why we think that this pattern exists, right? Mm-hmm. Is that in some ways, time and probability are the same thing when it comes to a potential payoff, right? So if you are making an investment for something that will happen in the future, it's inherently you have to discount by the probability of that never actually arriving, right?
Right.
And so it makes sense for animals to, at some level, have those be the same thing behaviorally. And oftentimes in these quantitative models, you can swap out a probabilistic payoff with a time-delayed payoff, and the curve is the same, right? So there's something that equates these things in our brains. And it's not just humans. You can do it with rats and other animals. It's this is deep in animal behavior too. The term is delayed discounting, right? Discounting the value of a future reward by the amount that it is delayed. And the question is, why do we do that, right? Why would something be worth less to us just because it comes in the future? Well, it would stand to reason that it's simply because when something comes in the future, you might not actually receive it, right? And so
I wonder if
the same as probability.
Is there a difference in that curve between prey animals and predators?
That's an interesting question. I don't know. We don't study predators a lot because they're a little bit harder to make experimental preparations with. So
Yeah.
I think people probably don't even know.
Right, right. I'm just thinking of how the sort of innate expectation of our own demise is much more built into prey animals than it is to predators, right? Leopards aren't walking around worrying about how they're going to be attacked and eaten,
That makes
whereas
sense.
deer are, and rats certainly are.
Another thing, surely it's a species level that would probably affect it is how often do you reproduce, right?
Right.
If it's the frequency is much lower, that obviously would affect your calculations about the future from a evolutionary fitness perspective, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and predators tend to have a much lower reproduction rate than prey animals as well. So that's tied into that as well. Yeah, it's interesting how these immediate decisions can be embedded in a very kind of deep philosophical or even spiritual assumption about what life is,
That's why I found psychology interesting. We talked about this a little bit on the podcast. It's like, for me, it was a way of studying philosophical questions, but rather than just like armchair idle speculation, using the tools of science and empiricism to try to get at some of these things that seem deep in human nature and the human experience.
Yeah.
And that's why I always found it really compelling.
Did you come across terror management theory at all?
No.
You familiar with that? It's sort of adjacent to what we're talking about. It's based on Becker, who was, what was his name? I forget his first name, but he wrote a book about his experience in Auschwitz and the denial of death, it's called.
Yeah.
And so some psychologists got this idea that we have innate denial mechanisms built into our consciousness. And so they started these really interesting series of experiments where they would sort of interview people walking down a sidewalk. I think this was in upstate New York at Skidmore College. I had one of the Sidney Solomon, I think his name was Sheldon Solomon. I had him on the podcast. Anyway, so they would interview people walking along the street and ask them, a series of questions about their idea about life and different, what decision they would make in this hypothetical situation or that one. And then they would move the interview site a block down the street so that the people they were interviewing had just walked past a funeral parlor. And their answers were totally different. Or they would, ask like, what, I'm trying to pull up all these examples. I haven't thought of this in years, but like what would be an appropriate sentence for, involuntary manslaughter, someone who drives drunk and kills a pedestrian. And the people who had just walked past the funeral parlor, who are primed even subconsciously, deliver much harsher sentences than the people who aren't subconsciously reminded of their own mortality. So they sort of got into this, how our decision-making process, even when we're totally unaware that something has primed us to remind us of our own mortality, how it changes the way we think about things and respond to things.
Yeah, I remember reading that exact study. Unfortunately, a lot of that, my understanding is a lot of that priming research doesn't usually replicate, or some a decent amount of the time.
Yeah.
So who knows? But it's still like, I think, even if it doesn't replicate, it still speaks to something, I think, in the human experience that we all kind of feel intuitively, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's an interesting question. Like, at what point in human history do we become conscious of and think about our mortality, right? In an abstract way, in a way that is different, because obviously there are many animals exhibit behaviors that indicate an avoidance of things that will kill them, right? Obviously evolutionarily adaptive.
Yeah.
But they don't often do so in a future-oriented way, right? Because whereas we are now very future-oriented in our approach to the world, but as like Harari makes that case in *Sapiens* that like future orientation is in many ways a product of agriculture, right, and agricultural thinking. And I wonder what the relationship with death is. Perhaps you know the answer to this among like contemporary foraging cultures.
I don't. I wrote about death in Civilized to Death. There's a whole section in there and how different hunter-gatherer groups deal with, elderly people becoming decrepit and can't keep up with the group, and if they're nomadic and all that. But on a psychological level, I'm not the only. I wouldn't even call it research. I would call it more first-person accounts. I think you and I, on your podcast, we talked about Don't Sleep, There Are Snakes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he talks about that, how they think about death. And, one of the most disturbing scenes in that book is when he's lying awake listening to the woman screaming who's trying to give birth. And I think the baby was breech birth. And
yeah. I still think about that often, actually.
Me too.
Yeah, when I read it, yeah.
Me too. That's pretty horrific.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think, it's a very interesting question because there's the question of knowing that we die, which clearly hunter-gatherers know.
Right.
But then the degree to which we locate ourselves within this particular body, as opposed to a culture in which the ancestors exist as spirits and are reincarnated into children and sort of cycle through. I imagine mortality holds a much different, probably closer to some believing Christian or Buddhist who thinks that the spirit persists. So I feel
or even
like
exceeds it.
Yeah,
because it's like. I would imagine that the extent to which a culture emphasizes individualism correlates highly with terror of death.
That's
right?
where I was going, right. We have this very materialistic sense where it's over, then of course we're going to be more freaked out about it.
Right, because it's the end of everything.
Right, right. Which, I feel like that's a very limited psychological or philosophical view. I know it's very, kind of Jack Donaghy, Margaret Thatcher view, right? Like get it while you can.
Setting aside the truth of it, there's also I just don't think it really makes you happy, and it's therefore not a very functional way of approaching your life, right?
Right. So
I'm not saying I don't live in constant terror of death. I'm just saying I get the psychology, right?
When those two things are in conflict for you, so when your intellectual sense of the truth of a thing is in conflict with the utility, the happiness that a belief would deliver to you, how do you handle that?
Boy, that's the project of my life, is learning how to handle that.
Yeah.
I like to think that as I've matured, I've learned to be willing to hold untrue things that serve my purposes and that increase my flourishing.
So you see that as a maturation,
it's a skill I want to learn to do better, and I think I have over the course of my lifetime. Yeah.
And can we describe the skill as the willingness to hold a belief that intellectually you don't think is true?
Well, it's maybe flexibility in the definition of truth, right? A more functional definition, right?
Functional.
Yeah, right. I've always been really interested in acceptance and commitment therapy. A school of psychology that was actually created by someone who graduated from my psychology department at my university, Steve Hayes, and they have a very interesting. They adopt a functional definition of psychological flourishing, right? And so, if you're schizophrenic, for example, and you have lots of hallucinations, they don't take it as given that you need to get rid of your hallucinations for a successful psychological intervention. The question is not, to make a person normal or to make a person like objectively correct, but simply to figure out what their values are and what they want in life and how to allow them to emit the behaviors that are required to move in the direction of their values, right? And that is their definition of truth. It comes from this sort of school of philosophy known as functional contextualism, which is like true only means something in the context of a defined objective that you've set out beforehand, a pre-analytic truth criterion, as they call it. And I think that that seems to me very reasonable, because what's the point of like rationality if it isn't to help you get things that you want, right? And if there is a point at which rationality makes you miserable and doesn't get you things that you want, it's self-invalidating, right? It is not rational by many reasonable definitions of rational, right? And my tendency, especially because, like I said, my first introduction to the world of science was like Steven Pinker, right? And how the mind works and scientific thinking, and then to Richard Dawkins, and these like very sort of dispassionate, rigorous thinkers who believe in the idea of rationality as like an end unto itself. What Nassim Taleb would call naive rationalism at some at some level, right? And it wasn't until I encountered Taleb's ideas that I actually sort of started to kind of question this idea of like rationality as an end unto itself. And but I still have this, because it was those were like such formative years for my, making my worldview. I still have this part of me that reflexively favors the rational Spock-like analysis of everything, even if it is depressing, right? So like the movies of Woody Allen, I think, are kind of a perfect meditation on this problem, right? Woody Allen is clearly a person who suffers from a rational knowledge of the meaninglessness of human existence, and it torments him deeply. And oftentimes his movies are about learning how to let go of that. And because there are many wonderful things in life, that are much closer to this earth and the present moment, beauty and love and sex and all of these things that his films are like meditations on how can you let go of all of those abstract rationalist ideas of the meaninglessness of existence and just be present and enjoy a good moment when it exists. Like I really think that all of his 60 movies fundamentally are completely about that, and that's why I love them so much. And that's the project of my life, is kind of shaking off in some ways a lot of this hyper rationalism and just allowing myself to reach my hand out for happiness when it's standing in front of me. And somehow it's not intuitive to me always. Yeah. 'Cause I get very stuck in my, abstract analysis always.
Yeah, definitely there's the yin yang there again, right? Because if one sacrifices that kind of rationality completely and only operates in terms of what brings me what I want, you can easily become a monster, right?
Sure.
There's no self-reflection, there's no regard for other people's feelings, and, seeing yourself embedded in a flow of opposing viewpoints.
I don't know. I'm not sure about that. I think oftentimes people who have very highly constructed, rationalized verbal worldviews deploy them to justify doing horrible things that run against their human nature, right?
Yeah.
A lot of, if you look at like the explicit reasoning of many people in the Nazi regime, right? A lot of it was very hyper-ordered, hyper-rationalist, utopian thinking. And I think that a lot of from my own personal experience, even, not necessarily people perpetrators of horrors, but just horrors to themselves. Most of the unhappy people I know are like super verbal, super rational, super smart, and kind of make themselves miserable. I think about, there are a lot of people that I know in my life who are very, very simple and who don't, and I like surrounding myself with people who are like this, who are kind of a counterbalance to me, who don't care about these ideas, who just laugh when I talk about, human mortality and the meaninglessness of existence and all of that, and who just live their life at a very 0 foot, altitude approach. And they seem I'm so jealous how contented they tend to seem, right?
Yeah. Have you read a book called The Razor's Edge?
So in fact, my advisor in at the CDC, when my research advisor was obsessed with that book, and he talked to me about it all the time. I haven't actually read it though. I think I watched. This is a movie, right?
Yeah, Bill
I think
Murray.
I watched the movie.
Bill
Okay.
Murray made the movie because he loved the book so much. I guess he
Okay.
financed it and starred in it, and
Right.
I've never seen the movie. I should see the movie. Bill Murray's an interesting person to think about in this conversation. You know, obviously a very intelligent guy, but intentionally simplifies his life as much as possible. You know, he
I
has
don't know
no.
too much about Bill Murray. I love his everything he's been in. I adore it. But
Well, he's very quirky. He has no agent, no representative. He does what he wants to do, and the only things that he sees are things that come to him through a friend or a friend of a friend. You know, he's like not in the system. He's very detached from the system, but he does all this. He'll just like walk into somebody's wedding and, you know, just crash weddings and like, wait, Bill Murray's in the lobby? What's going on? He loves doing that kind of shit. So he's very, I think, you know, kind of like you, he's very self-deprecating about his own success and his own notoriety and all this kind of stuff. Yeah.
I respect that very much.
Yeah, I do too. I think that's an interesting quality. Yeah, who's the other guy? Ace Ventura, Pet Detective. What's that guy? Jim Carrey. He's another one who enjoys taking the piss out of his own notoriety. I like that. Yeah, you know, when I was talking about rationality, I totally agree with you that people cloak their selfishness in rationality. But what I was referring to was I don't know how to say this, like deploying rationality to keep your ego in check. You know, like rationality that says, oh, everybody says I'm great. I'm not great. I'm normal. I'm just, you know, and what does great mean? Like, oh, I'm more intelligent than most people. So what? That's like saying I'm taller than most people, or, you know, I can drink more than most people or something. It's not something you deserve credit for. You're just born that way, you know? Which gets back to this question of whether intelligence is a tolerance for boredom or not, or tedium, and all that kind of stuff. One of the things you said in your notes was you have an idea of a civilizational barbell strategy. What is that?
Yeah. Well, so this is it's going to come out as a very half-baked idea because I've been wanting to write something about it ever since I read your two books, and I've just been struggling to figure out how I incorporate the awareness you have brought me into my daily life and my worldview, right? And I think there's a really important caveat that you explicitly call out in your books, which is like, look, I don't know what to do with this information at some level because we can't go back. There's no going back. Right?
Yeah.
So the only one way of interpreting that is that just means we're doomed to be miserable and that sucks, right? I think there's probably there are ways in which that is just true, and maybe we just have to accept that. But some part of me doesn't want to accept that, and I try to figure out how do I incorporate this awareness of the ways in which living at odds with our evolved natures causes suffering, and if there's some way we can mitigate that, right? But also at the same time, you know, you talk a lot about in the book how civilization oftentimes touts as its greatest accomplishments things that solve the problems of civilization.
Right.
And I think about, like, you and I are both CPAP users, I believe, right? And I think about that too. So, like, I think it is widely speculated that the reason why so many people have sleep apnea is because of our radically different diets and the way that it causes our jaws to develop differently because they're simply less challenged because we're
Right.
eating this highly processed, like carbohydrate-based soft food. And this is probably the cause of some level of the unusual prevalence we see of this problem, which doesn't really make sense from a like. Usually, when there's something that is a chronic disease, it's a good candidate for something that is a byproduct of civilization and our being in our unnatural environments. And so, but we do have this technology that kind of fixes the problem if you can get around some of the parts of it that are miserable, right? And like it's also true with vaccines, for example. Like it's solving a problem that is largely created by the domestication of animals, but it's not that we're not better off without the vaccines, right? You wouldn't choose to live in 1900 rather than now for most things. And so this idea of the barbell strategy is borrowed from Nassim Taleb, and it's from he advocates this in many domains of life, but it comes from like financial investing strategy, right? And the idea is you invest all of your efforts at the two ends of some spectrum and never in the mushy middle, right? And so the idea is like maybe there's some way in which we can take the fruits of civilization that have our vaccines and our CPAP machines and all these things that make life better, like cool aspects of AI, the ability that we can like stream any movie that was ever created. Like those are things that I think are cool. I would love to have those things. My whole computer keyboard brand is all about nostalgia for future optimism for technology and the promise of the internet, and all of these sort of idealistic ideas around the possibility of civilization getting better. That's the core premise of Star Trek, is the counterfactual narrative conceit that humanity is capable of improvement, right? And I would like to put some effort towards reaping, like if we're stuck in civilization and must suffer in this way, at the very least, like let's have the mango slicer sometimes, right? Or whatever. I think mango slices are a really stupid example, but it's you took it from The Rational Optimist, right?
Right.
But maybe we can have the good parts of civilization without the bad, if we understand how we can incorporate at the other end of this barbell, like the parts of hunter-gatherer psychology that are part of us, and how we can bring them into our contemporary life. Like, is there some way that we might possibly be able to have both? And I don't think it's logically impossible. Certainly the first step is something like your book, self-awareness, right? Understanding that if you go to work every day and you have this tedious, mind-numbing grind of a job, moving spreadsheets around all day, and you find that a little painful, that's maybe not your fault. Maybe you're not the only person who feels that way, and maybe that's okay. Like maybe it's natural to feel that way, and start at least from that premise.
Right.
And maybe once we accept that these things aren't moral failings, like for example, if you can't be faithful to your wife, right, or whatever, maybe these things are not you being a lone, horrible human being, but maybe there's something that you didn't understand about human nature. And if we apply the faculty of reason and rationality, maybe there's some way we can live with this knowledge of our nature in contemporary civilization that is an improvement, right? Let's have both ends of the spectrum. Let's have the benefits of technology and rationality and communication and all of these things that allow us to make our lives better, given that we can't go back to a fully hunter-gatherer society. But at the same time, do so in a way that is informed by a knowledge of those things,
Yeah.
right? And I don't know exactly what that looks like, but some of the things around the edges are obvious, right? Putting less of an emphasis on individualism, broadly speaking, right? Trying to care less about status, trying to be more a part of a community of people where you can carve out, it's not practical to do this in every domains of life, but it is possible through intentionality and conscious effort to carve out a little oasis of non-transactionality in our lives, to have a group of people that we surround ourselves with where we're not tracking social debits and credits, we're not trying to impress each other, we're not trying to get anything out of each other other than community and companionship, right? That's a really good start. I think being conscious about relationships and sex and polyamory is like, I think that's one very reasonable solution to a lot of relationship problems that people see. And so many other things like this fall into the category of ways in which we can still be in civilization, but be a little bit more hunter-gatherer in our psychology, subjectively. And that's what I meant by this idea of a civilizational barbell strategy.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense. And I think even people who haven't been able to articulate it as well as you just did, or even think about it explicitly, I feel like there's an energetic yearning for it. People
Absolutely.
doing, paleo diet and CrossFit and oh, I'm going to go lift rocks and,
Right.
instead of go to the gym, or, ecstatic dance. Just go with these people and move and, have a kind of resonant experience with other people. A lot of what I'm doing in my life now is an attempt to kind of retool parts of civilization that work and support the luxury of reinvigorating or reanimating parts of the hunter-gatherer mentalities you describe, right? So I live in a very, very small town where pretty much everyone knows each other. The nearest police station is an hour away, so you take care of your shit. You do what you got to do. And in fact, in an hour, I'm going to a meeting of the Peace Patrol, which is kind of like the local people who kind of try to de-escalate situations so that the police don't have to get involved. Very hunter-gatherer, conflict resolution kind of attitude. Yeah. And we buy our food from the local ranch and the gardens, and the water comes down from the mountain, and we get the other stuff delivered by Amazon and Costco, So it's definitely, I feel like this is a time to integrate, but we have to be very deliberate about the decisions we make, because, of course, civilization wants you to buy the whole package. It's
For sure. And all of the cultural ideas that come with it. And I think those are the ones that are most insidious.
Yeah.
Right. Because they're just, they advertise themselves as being true for all time, for all humans, to the beginning of being human. And that's just simply demonstrably false.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think one of the most important things in adopting this different way of being is just accepting that a lot of the dominant narrative about what has been true for humans for all time is just wishful thinking, somebody's wishful thinking.
Or whatever the opposite of wishful thinking is, like a lot of the negative, the sort of neo-Hobbesian view of the, that life was horrible before civilization, which I guess maybe it's wishful thinking justifying civilization. But man, I just yesterday I was listening to Scott Galloway, who's an intelligent person, and he pulled out this fucking trope about how nobody lived past 30 until 100 years ago. And I just want to pull my hair out every time I hear somebody say that.
It happens all the time. And you're right. It's among people who are oftentimes should be much smarter than that. We talked about John Gray, the British philosopher,
right.
Who I think is a very interesting person, and I really like a lot of his work. But he talks a lot about human nature and is just completely innocent of any knowledge in this domain, right? And it's odd because I know that I know from Taleb's book that he's friends with Taleb, and Taleb talks a lot about this statistical misapprehension about age. But it's not that. I think it's so prevalent in writing in Western culture that you just don't think about it. You can't question absolutely everything all the time, and so it's sort of understandable. But if you're going to talk a lot about human nature and use your assertions as a premise for other conclusions, you should maybe reevaluate that.
Yeah.
More people should read your book, frankly.
Well, but even people who have read my book, it's strange because there are people who I know have read Civilized to Death and that I've had conversations with, and we've talked about this stuff. like Joe Rogan. I've explained this to Joe Rogan many times, and yet sometimes I still hear him talking about, how people were dying from tuberculosis in prehistory, and it's like, dude,
Sure.
I explained this to you. I sat there and explained it to you, and at least he claimed to have read the book. I don't know if he did. I don't care if he did, but I explained the whole longevity thing. The strength of the unexamined premise, you can even examine it, see it for what it is, and still revert to your previous misunderstanding. It makes me think about, people in Darwin's day, how they just, intelligent people just had these very ingrained ideas of racial superiority that were, including Darwin. He was against slavery, but he certainly believed that white people were superior to non-white people.
Yeah, just taken as a given. And,
It's just like, of course.
Mentioned as an aside in other arguments.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. It's crazy. What were you doing at NASA?
So it's actually kind of interesting. The space shuttle and other very important pieces of NASA technology that require software has, of course, space shuttle doesn't even exist anymore. But at the time, there were all of these extremely mission critical software tools that NASA used, and they intentionally created a software facility that was independent from the people who designed the original software to do the testing. And it was called Independent Verification and Validation Facility. And this is something that is very rarely done in the world of software. It certainly was very rare at the time. But the idea was this is so important. Like one calculation error can mean billions of dollars incinerated and human lives. So we have to be super careful about how we develop software. And so they created this separate place that happened to be in West Virginia. And that was on purpose. It was to put it in this somewhat remote place that was separated from the engineers and the other NASA facilities so that they wouldn't share the assumptions of the people who did the original software development.
That's
right?
interesting.
And so there was an internship program for students to learn like technology related stuff at NASA. And I applied for that when I was like 14 or something. And I got that internship. And I was working in like what nowadays we would just call like IT, basically. It was called a computer network engineering assistant or something like that. And so essentially I was like helping to build the computer networks and the computer systems that the people who worked there were using to do their software development. Nothing particularly glamorous or interesting, but it was very exciting to me as someone who grew up on Star Trek and was very excited about space exploration and technology. And I was just very into programming and computers at that time, which was still like not a prevalent phenomenon. Most people didn't have computers in their homes, certainly in West Virginia. And in fact, most even people who didn't have access to the internet. But we had like a T1 line at this NASA facility, which was very exciting. It was like basically broadband many years before anybody else had broadband. And so this was a very fun job. And then I would do it like I kind of developed a good relationship with the people who worked there. And I would do it every summer for most of my high school and college years after that. It was a lot of fun. It was very cool.
You were a super geek, huh?
I'm a very geeky person, yeah.
But I'm picturing
one of the people.
I'm picturing you like a teenage. Like, did you consider yourself gay as a teenager?
Around this time, I definitely had a boyfriend. I don't know if I considered myself gay, actually.
He did.
Well, yeah.
Well, that's funny. I mean, I'm just picturing you in West Virginia, ambiguous sexuality or whatever, super into technology. Like, you must have been a
weirdo.
Yeah.
I think a lot of my dark view of humanity, and like this is why I gravitated towards Woody Allen movies and stuff when I was younger, is informed by the extraordinary cruelty I was subjected to by my peers, by virtue of being different and by virtue of being weird. Right? I remember, this is so kind of mortifying to me now, but I used to go to junior high school wearing like a Star Trek comm badge, the communicator badge of Star Trek for the Next Generation, because I don't know, I thought that would make me cool or something.
Right.
And I had this weird experience where for fifth and sixth grade, they like had this. My school district had this horrible idea where they would take the IQ scores from everyone across the county, and they would take the top 15 people with the highest IQ scores, and they would put them in their own classroom called the self-contained gifted classroom. And so for 2 years, this is like where my sensibility of the world grew up, and that's where I learned about Star Trek from a friend of mine, and I came to like learn. It's the first time I learned to write computer code on an Apple IIe computer, and I was like the king of the nerds and really flourished in that environment. And then after sixth grade, I was plunged back into the normal world. That's why I showed up wearing a comm badge, and it didn't go well. So yeah, to answer your question, extremely weird.
You say that was a terrible idea, but it sounds like it gave you something that you still have. I mean, the re-entry must have been horrible, but those 2 years must have been pretty wonderful in a way.
They were amazing, and I think they gave me a kind of confidence in my weirdness and my knowledge that there are other people in the world that you can find, that you can build a community with who are like you, and you don't necessarily have to worry about conforming to the prevalent narrative.
I mean, what a gift to get at that age, right? Because I think, and I had something similar. My parents were extremely accepting and supportive of my weirdness. And I was a freak, dude. I came home from school, put on a loincloth, took off all my clothes. I wouldn't wear Western clothing until I had to go to school the next morning. Slept on the floor under a leopard print blanket because I thought I was like, tanning rabbit skins in the backyard. I had a wigwam, the whole fucking thing. I was in another world. And, these days I'd probably be given Ritalin or something. But I did have that sense in that sort of, crossing the desert of adolescence where you just feel like you're the only person like you in the world. I did have a sense that when I got to college, that's when things would start. That's when I'd start to, find my people and flourish and connect with girls, and like everything was good. There was like a promised land, a light at the end of the tunnel, or whatever analogy we're using. But I think most kids don't have that, right? Most kids just think they're wandering straight into a darkness that's never going to get better.
It certainly feels like that. I think it felt like that for me for much of that, especially the junior high school period. I didn't. Also, the idea of like waiting until college or until I was an adult was just an unimaginably infinite span of time.
It's a long time.
I was very, very, very miserable, especially during those first couple of years. It's interesting also to note that like what you were at that age and what I was at that age is basically what we are now, right?
Yeah.
It just kind of like defines and frames the things that we care about as adults during this extremely formative few-year period when you discover the stuff that really makes you excited.
Well, I've read, I forget who was reading, but they said something like properly maturing is about becoming ever more yourself, just stripping away all the shit that isn't your essence, Yeah. I kind of relate to that. So you offered me, well, first of all, thank you for the keyboard that you gave me when
My pleasure.
That's I feel awkward about. I do feel like the guy, wearing old clothes and a brand new Rolex. But
well, it brings me pleasure that if you do write another book, it might perhaps be written on that. So that in and of itself is payment enough.
Thank you.
Sentimentally.
Yes. What was I going to say? I lost my train of thought. Something that you offered me but did not deliver on, have not delivered on yet, and so I'm gonna kind of call you out on it here. You said you were gonna recommend a couple of your favorite Star Trek Next Generation episodes.
Oh yes, with great pleasure.
Because I'm old school. I've never seen the Next Generation. I've only seen the Spock Kirk stuff, and I've been wanting to watch them. And I even looked up online, like, what are the best Next Generation episodes. But then I thought, nah, let me ask Ryan. Let me get it, a personal recommendation. One of them that came up that looks interesting is something about the Inner Light or something like that.
Yeah, okay, so The Inner Light would definitely be on anybody's short list of best Star Trek The Next Generation episodes because dramatically it is the most moving episode of the show. It's just, like, I can't watch it without crying every time. Even just thinking about it right now, I'm sort of tearing up a little bit.
Really? Wow.
It's just a beautiful story told in a very interesting and surprising way. That I kind of it's so well executed. I don't want to tell you anything about it so as to not spoil it.
Okay.
But I think there are some. So that's a great episode. By all means, watch it. If you watch that and you're like, this is shit, you're definitely not going to like Star Trek: The Next Generation, and there's no point. But you'd be an inhuman monster if you reacted that way. There are some people who react that way, but nevertheless. So let's set that to one side. Definitely watch it. But I think for you, like, the most tailored episode is Who Watches the Watchers, which is a very anthropological episode because it is about, there are literal anthropologists in it who are hidden behind a holographic field that conceals their ability to watch them. They call it a duck blind, right? And so they're watching the evolution of this culture that is not aware of the existence of other extraterrestrial life, essentially. And something goes wrong and they accidentally reveal themselves and contaminate the culture. And many interesting things happen as a result of that, and I think it's just a very you episode.
Okay, that sounds great.
So I think that would be a great place to start. Another one is, so behind me, I have an original piece from the set of this episode. It's called Darmok. It's my favorite episode of Star Trek The Next Generation. And, sorry.
How do you spell it? Darmok? That's the episode?
Darmok.
Okay.
And it is about, so at a surface level, it is about an alien culture that speaks in a language that the universal translator can't decode. And so, because there's this narrative conceit in Star Trek that they can magically speak to any alien culture that they encounter through some kind of magical technology that makes this possible, called the Universal Translator. But they encounter this race known as the Tamarians, whose ship that is up there, who don't, for whom the Universal Translator doesn't work. And they can't figure out why. They've encountered this species and they can't, in the past, a few times, they and other cultures that they know of have encountered the Tamarians. But sometimes communications lead to fighting, and sometimes they just can't understand each other and move on. But they don't know whether it's a hostile race or a friendly race because they can't communicate. And so that's the sci-fi premise, or the cerebral premise of the episode. But the episode, I think, at its core is about what Star Trek is about. More broadly, the theme that Gene Roddenberry cared about most, which is the idea of two sentient beings, in this case, two cultures, that are disposed toward conflict or misunderstanding because they're totally different. Starting out at a place where they can't understand each other, but ending up in a place where there is a kind of mutual understanding, and that going from the one place to the other is extremely valuable, to the extent that the captain of the other ship makes a lot of sacrifice. He essentially gives his life for the possibility of contact and communication with another alien race. And so in the process of this sort of challenge that he and the other captain, the alien captain and Picard go through together, they become very close, and Captain Picard essentially becomes able to speak their language a little bit. But in the process, the captain dies, and he consciously, knowingly, willingly took that risk just for the possibility of connection and communication and mutual understanding. And that, to me, is the core premise of Star Trek. It's about, and it's why the idea of the Prime Directive exists, right? The idea of seeking other intelligent life under, with the goal of understanding it, but without ever changing it. Coexisting, cohabitating in the universe together, and letting people be who they are. I think that's a beautiful idea, one that you rarely hear in culture at all, because most cultural commentary is all about, I have an idea that's correct, and I wish to convince you that you need to be like me, right? So many conversations are about people taking their arbitrary aesthetic preferences and elevating them to universal moral laws, right? That's like the disguised motive behind most conversations that we have, and certainly the ones that we read in the news and the media and op-ed pages is that. Like, here's the thing I like. If you don't like it, you're a bad person. And Star Trek is, the core message of Star Trek is the opposite of that. It's like, how can I let you exist in the way that you are, that's radically different, maybe even on paper incompatible with who I am? And how can we achieve some kind of modus vivendi of mutual understanding? And if there are, positive things we can contribute to each other, have those things, but without trying to change the things that we don't like. I think it's a beautiful idea. And it applies just, I think I try to apply it in romantic relationships, friendships, everything about life. I think we should certainly apply it way more in politics than we do currently. I just think it's a beautiful message. And it's fundamentally what Star Trek at its best is about.
Right.
So start there.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. That's sounds wonderful. I don't want to bring you down, but do you watch Black Mirror?
I don't. Because I have been warned not to watch it because it would make me really depressed. In fact, I thought about watching the episode that you recommended to me that is sort of Star Trek based, and I asked my husband Alon about it. He watches everything in the universe. He loves movies and TV. Used to work for Netflix, and he said, no, you don't need to watch that. That's just going to make you really upset. Don't watch it. So I took his advice.
Well, given your love for Star Trek, it might, because it's definitely sacrilegious in a sense. But there are, I mean, I agree. Most episodes that I've seen of Black Mirror are very disturbing. They're very, very intelligent, very interesting commentary on the near future and trajectories that we currently exist in, and if they continue in that direction, what's down the road a little bit. But there
sort
are
of Twilight Zone like in that
yeah,
way.
it's definitely
Okay.
Twilight Zone for sure.
Okay.
But there are a few episodes that are. You reminded me talking about Darmok and Inner Light. Actually, there are some episodes that are just so beautiful and so touching, and where the sort of the technology or science fiction or the magical thinking or whatever it is employed to release the best parts of humanity. Maybe it's 1 in 10 episodes, but those episodes are amazing and much needed, I think.
I've definitely been Black Mirror curious for a long time. I have a friend who worked in the art department there, and he, in fact, I know him because he's into Star Trek prop replicas like I am.
Right.
And it has often been recommended to me. I usually turn to movies as a kind of escapism, and I kind of don't want reminders of how unsettling the world actually is. I can read the news for that, so I just haven't experienced it much. I'm sorry. Carry on.
Yeah. Well, I'll send you a text recommending 1 or 2 episodes that have that
That's
effect.
good. We can swap episode recommendations.
Yeah, exactly. Have you ever seen a film called The Diving Bell and the Butterfly?
I've never even heard of it.
It's an amazing story. It's a true story. The guy was the editor of Vogue magazine in France. And so a well-known guy, great life, everything's, making lots of money and going to lots of parties and having a good time. And anyway, he's taking his kid to school one morning and he has a massive stroke. And he wakes up in the hospital and he can't move at all. And the doctors think he's brain dead, but he's not. And the only thing he can move intentionally is he can blink his left eye. And one day, one of the nurses is, I don't know, giving him a sponge bath or something, and he keeps blinking his eye, and she notices, and she says, "Oh, you poor thing," and she thinks his eye's dry, so she puts some eye drops in his eyes, and he keeps blinking that one eye, but like in a pattern. And she notices, and she says, "Well, you're not in there, right? There's no one in there. Blink twice if you're in there." And he blinks twice. And she says, "Blink 3 times if you're in there." And he blinks 3 times. And so suddenly it's like, wait a minute, this guy's conscious. He's in there. And so she develops a system with like the most frequently used letters in the French language being the lowest number of blinks to, make the blinking as efficient as possible, so he can actually communicate. He can spell out words blinking his eye. And long story short, he writes a memoir through this system with her and tells his story and tells what it's like to be in there and the memories and the dreams and the stuff that's the richness inside his own mind. And the book's called The Diving Bell and the Butterfly. And the day it's published, he dies in real life. And so years later, a painter named Julian Schnabel decided he wanted to do a film. I think he only did 2 films. And he's a very well-known painter, $100,000 paintings. And so he did this film, and it's unlike any film I've ever seen. It's like made by a guy who doesn't give a shit about being a filmmaker, really. He just wanted to tell this story visually. It's beautifully, beautifully done. Anyway, it'll make you, you talked about films as escapism and that have a good feeling at the heart of them. That's an incredible film.
It's a very French-sounding film, actually. Isn't it?
It is, yeah. It's very French. It's very French.
Actually, there is also that the setup is a Twilight Zone episode, actually.
Oh, really?
Actually, it's either Twilight Zone or Alfred Hitchcock. I actually kind of confused those because they were sort of the same era and kind of the same setup. There's definitely an episode where someone is in the same situation and are trying to communicate. We see the whole thing from their perspective, like all the nurses and stuff. It's like, I think it might even be one shot the whole episode. And we're like on the gurney experiencing everything that's going on around. So it's kind of like just an interesting experiment in film storytelling. And at the very end, like he's able to just like tap something out with his fingers and make it clear to the nurse that he's actually in there and capable of communicating. But I think the movie sounds much more profound and interesting.
Yeah, well, it's an interesting idea. I spent a lot of time in Trumansburg, New York, which is where Twilight Zone was filmed.
Oh, interesting.
Back in the day, yeah.
I never would have guessed that it would have been shot in New York.
Ithaca, New York was kind of the pre-Hollywood center for early television.
Okay.
The Little Rascals, I don't know if you ever saw that.
Sure.
Very early television. That was filmed in Ithaca as well. I think like pre-World War II, there was a lot of TV getting made in upstate New York. So listen, Ryan, I've talked myself out. I really appreciate your time. And
no problem.
You're a fascinating dude. I hope we'll stay in contact. You're somebody I could imagine never getting bored with.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I feel the same way, and I really hope you'll keep writing.
Thank you.
I want to see that next book, if you want. I mean, if it's not boring to you.
No, I feel a lot of resonance with you, and I think it's because both of us we're both looking back and forward, we're looking back to find the best ways to go forward, We didn't even really talk about the keyboards and the sort of retro future optimism and all that.
Well, they can listen to your interview with me, and
exactly.
We talked about that.
We talked about it there. Yep. But I feel like we share that. We're what's the line? scratch a cynic and you find a disappointed optimist, right?
Yeah,
there's
absolutely.
like, I feel like both of us are very hopeful about the future and see evidence for human decency and generosity and kindness and all these wonderful qualities in the past. So why the hell can't we have it in the future? It certainly seems to be there as a possibility. We just have to figure out how to get through the morass of modern culture and capitalism, which, bringing the conversation all the way back, that's why you're an aspiring underachiever. That's why you're suspicious of these sorts of accolades, because you recognize that that's just the surface crust on something that goes much deeper.
And the worldview that you have to buy into that goes
Right.
frequently that goes along with that just doesn't make you happy.
Right. And that's how they seduce you into it, right? Yeah, you can be famous, you can be rich, you can be successful.
Or just simply, this is what everyone else does. And oftentimes that suffices for many people.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's not even an explicit promise of any payoff.
Yeah.
But
Well-
that's why I would like to have you continue writing and advocating for these things, because not enough people are doing that.
Well, thank you. And the reason I went on that little rant is that if the book that I'm working on now is a book about the future of, like, how to adapt our relationships to the better world that we hope will emerge from this mess. So it's kind of Sex at Dawn was looking at the past. This might be a reflection of the future, hopefully.
It's a beautiful theme. I want to read it.
We'll see. Yeah, maybe I'll consult you, and because I definitely, in Sex at Dawn, people ask me, like, regrets or things I would do differently, and one of the regrets I have about that is that I didn't, Casilda and I just didn't really get into same-sex relationships very much. And, that wasn't any kind of intentionality or, resistance on our part. It's just, it was so much about evolution and reproduction and, all that. But I feel like that's such an important thing, especially looking toward the future, because I feel like gay men have worked out a lot of things that the rest of us need to figure out. Like,
Simply
you
by
guys,
pressures of circumstance, certainly we've
for
faced
sure.
different thinking about different things.
Yeah.
Well, I'm happy to be your homosexuality consultant.
Thank you.
I'm an expert, truly an expert.
Exactly. That'll be in the acknowledgement page,
I'd be honored.
All right, thank you. I'm going to stop recording here.